In this video, we're going to talk about something that many men and women over 70 quietly think about, but rarely say out loud. It's the question of whether we still need a partner in our lives, or if peace and independence can be enough. Life changes as we age, the house grows quieter, the days feel slower, and the things that once felt urgent don't always matter in the same way anymore. For some, companionship feels more important than ever. For others, solitude brings a kind of freedom that's hard to give up. This isn't about what society expects, or what family and friends might say. It's about what feels right for you in this stage of life. That's why we'll be sharing the story of Harold, a man who discovered that peace, acceptance, and self-respect can sometimes be stronger than the need for constant companionship. His journey may sound familiar, or it may challenge the way you've been thinking about your own life. Before we dive in, I'd love to hear from you. Do you feel at peace living on your own, or do you still long for someone to share your days with? Comment below with your thoughts. Your story might inspire or comfort someone else who's walking this same road. Point 1. The weight of quiet after loss. When you reach your 70s, one of the hardest changes many people face is the quiet that follows after losing a spouse or after children have moved on with their own lives. The silence in the house can feel heavy at first. You wake up expecting to hear familiar footsteps, or you glance at the chair where your loved one once sat, and the emptiness stings. This is something older men and women rarely talk about openly, but it's real. Grief doesn't leave quickly, and for some, it never fully disappears, it just softens with time. Harold, the man we're learning from in this story, went through this exact season. In those early months after his wife passed away, the quiet felt unbearable. He filled his days with small projects that didn't really need doing, tightening screws, polishing tools, even going to the hardware store just to chat with strangers. Many of you may have done something similar, finding little ways to distract yourself, just to keep from facing the silence head-on. But here's the truth Harold discovered, and it's something worth sharing. That heavy quiet, over time, can shift into something else. It doesn't always remain painful. Sometimes, slowly, it begins to feel like a kind of space, room to breathe, to reflect, to rediscover who you are outside of being someone's partner or caregiver. It doesn't happen overnight, and it's not easy, but it can happen. For older adults listening right now, it's important to know that feeling lost in that quiet is natural. It doesn't mean you're weak or doing something wrong. It simply means you're human, adjusting to a new chapter of life. And with time, just like Harold, you may find that the silence carries not only memories of loss but also the possibility of peace. Point 2. Discovering peace in simple routines. As time passed, Harold realized that life didn't have to be filled with noise or constant activity to feel meaningful. What once felt like empty hours slowly turned into opportunities for peace. He began taking early morning walks by the lake, often before the sun had risen. The quiet water, the cool air, and the gentle light gave him a sense of calm he hadn't known before. It was no longer about rushing to meet a deadline or keeping up with the busyness of the world, it was about slowing down and noticing the beauty around him. He also picked up his old fishing rod, not because he needed to catch dinner, but because standing by the shore, watching the ripples on the water, brought him peace. Many of you may understand that feeling, the joy of doing something not for results, but simply for the calm it brings. Some find it in gardening, some in reading, and others in sitting quietly with a cup of tea. These simple routines, often overlooked when life is busier, can become some of the most meaningful parts of later life. Harold also started reading books that had sat on his shelves for years. Instead of rushing through chapters, he savored them, enjoying the slow rhythm of each page. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't living by a schedule, he was living by what brought him peace. This shift was important because it showed Harold something powerful: solitude does not have to mean loneliness. When you fill your days with small joys and quiet routines, life takes on a gentler rhythm. For older adults, these little habits, walking, reading, or even watching the seasons change, become anchors. They remind you that even in stillness, life can feel full and deeply rewarding. Point 3. Needing versus wanting companionship. One of the turning points in Harold's journey came when he asked himself a question that many older men quietly think about: do I really need someone by my side, or do I simply want it? For most of his life, he believed the two were the same. Society often makes us feel that being alone means something is missing, especially for men. People expect widowers or divorced men to quickly find a new partner, as if living alone is unnatural. But Harold slowly realized that was not true. Being alone, he discovered, is not the same as being lonely. There's a big difference between the two. Loneliness is an emptiness that aches. But solitude, when embraced, can be peaceful and freeing. He noticed that he could enjoy his meals without having to compromise on what to eat. He could sit for hours in his chair with a book, and no one asked why he was so quiet. If he wanted to spend money on a tool he didn't really need, there was no debate. For the first time in decades, he lived by his own rhythm. That doesn't mean he never missed companionship. Holidays sometimes felt heavier, and evenings could still stretch long. But instead of rushing to fill that space with another person, Harold learned to let those feelings pass, like a cool breeze across the lake. The important lesson he discovered was this: needing someone and wanting someone are not the same. At his age, he no longer needed a woman to feel complete. What he wanted was peace, and that peace was something he could create for himself. Point 4. Redefining love in later life. As Harold settled into his new rhythm, he began to notice that his idea of love had changed. When he was younger, love was about building a life together, raising a family, sharing responsibilities, and planning for the future. It was full of energy, urgency, and sometimes even storms. But now, in his 70s, he realized that love no longer looked the same. Love, at this stage, felt softer and quieter. It wasn't about passion that burned bright and faded quickly. It was about presence, comfort, and meaning. For Harold, love showed up in the laughter of his grandchildren when they visited, in the warm voice of an old friend calling on the phone, or in the familiar song that brought back memories of his wife. These moments of connection carried the same weight as the romance he once knew, just in a different form. He thought of his late wife often, but no longer with the sharp pain that once filled his days. Instead, he remembered her with gratitude, thankful for the years they had shared. He didn't feel the need to replace her or search for someone else to fill her place. That love still lived in him, it had simply moved into a quieter corner of his heart. This change taught him something valuable: love does not disappear as we age, but it transforms. It becomes less about needing another person at your side every day and more about noticing the small, meaningful connections that already surround you. For older adults, this can be a comforting realization. Even if romance is no longer the center of your life, love is still present, in family, in friendship, in memory, and in the peaceful moments you create for yourself. Point 5. The cost of starting over. As Harold grew more comfortable in his solitude, he also became honest with himself about what starting over with a new partner might mean. At first, the idea of companionship sounded comforting: someone to share meals with, someone to sit beside in the evenings. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that new relationships at this stage of life come with challenges that can be heavy. There are the emotional pieces: grief from past losses, memories that never fully leave, and the differences in how each person has lived. Then there are practical concerns. At 70 or 75, health plays a big role. Doctor visits, medication schedules, or even physical limitations can affect daily life, and not everyone is ready to take on another person's needs. Money can be another delicate subject. Combining finances after decades of independence is rarely simple. And of course, family dynamics come into play. Children and grandchildren may have their own opinions, which can make things complicated. For Harold, it wasn't about bitterness or shutting the door on love. It was about being realistic. After a lifetime of responsibility, working hard, providing for his family, caring for his wife, he realized he no longer wanted to carry those extra weights. What he wanted most was peace, not another set of worries. This doesn't mean that companionship is wrong. For many older adults, finding someone new brings joy and a fresh sense of purpose. But Harold's story is a reminder that it's also perfectly valid to choose not to start over. Protecting your peace can be just as valuable as pursuing romance. At this stage in life, the question isn't, what should I do, but rather, what feels right for me now? Point 6. Strength in solitude. For most of his life, Harold believed strength meant providing, protecting, and being there for others. Like many men of his generation, he wore those roles like armor. He took pride in being dependable, the one people leaned on. But when the house grew quiet and the demands of those roles faded, he was faced with a new question: what does strength look like when no one is depending on you anymore? At first, that quiet felt like weakness. Without someone to care for, he wondered if his purpose had slipped away. But over time, Harold began to see things differently. Strength, he realized, was not only about carrying others, it was also about standing steady in your own company. It was about finding balance without always needing to be needed. Solitude gave him space to hear his own thoughts clearly, something he never had when life was busier. He discovered what truly brought him peace: a morning walk, a slow afternoon with a good book, or simply watching the sun set over the lake. These weren't grand achievements, but they gave him a sense of calm that felt powerful in its own way. Harold's perspective shifted. He no longer feared being alone. Instead, he found confidence in knowing he could live fully without depending on another person to complete him. And here's the important part: if the right kind of companionship ever came along, he would welcome it. But he no longer chased it, because his peace was no longer tied to someone else's presence. Point 7. Connection beyond romance. As Harold embraced his independence, he also discovered that connection didn't have to mean living with someone or being in a romantic partnership. The older he got, the more he noticed the small, deliberate ways life still offered connection, and how deeply those moments mattered. Some came through friendships. Once a month, he met an old coworker for coffee. They didn't talk about anything earth-shattering, just memories, small updates, and laughter. But those conversations left Harold feeling lighter, as though the warmth lingered long after the coffee cup was empty. Other times, it was helping a neighbor fix a broken fence or receiving a surprise phone call from his brother who lived 2 states away. These little connections, though brief, reminded him he wasn't alone in the world. Family played its part, too. His grandchildren didn't visit every week, but when they did, the house filled with the kind of energy that only children can bring. Their laughter echoed through the walls, and even after they left, Harold carried that joy with him for days. It reminded him of the years when his own kids were small, and those memories became a gift in themselves. And sometimes, connection didn't require anyone at all. Sitting on his porch at dusk, watching the breeze ripple across the lake, Harold felt a sense of belonging, not to one person, but to the world itself. The birdsong in the morning, the rhythm of the seasons, even the quiet routines of his daily life gave him comfort. Point 8. Fulfillment redefined. When Harold thought about fulfillment in his younger years, it was tied to work, productivity, and responsibility. He measured his value by how hard he worked, how well he provided for his family, and how much he could get done in a day. Many of you may remember that same mindset, the constant push to keep moving, keep building, and keep proving yourself. But in his 70s, Harold noticed that picture had shifted. Fulfillment no longer came from endless activity or achievements. Instead, it came from the small, intentional choices he made each day. His mornings began with coffee brewed exactly the way he liked it, followed by a slow walk down the country road. Some afternoons he spent tending to his small vegetable garden, enjoying the simple satisfaction of pulling fresh tomatoes from the soil. Even a quiet drive around the lake gave him a sense of rhythm and connection. He realized that fulfillment at this age wasn't about being busy, it was about being present. It wasn't about comparing his life to others, but about asking himself, does this life feel right for me? That question became more important than any outside measure of success. Another important change was how Harold felt about other people's choices. If a friend remarried or traveled the world with a new partner, Harold could be happy for them without feeling left behind. Their story didn't have to be his. For the first time in his life, he no longer measured his happiness against someone else's. His life fit him, and that was enough. Point 9. Choosing peace without apology. One of the greatest lessons Harold carried with him into his later years was that peace is something worth protecting. When he was younger, life was filled with noise, responsibilities at work, expectations at home, and the constant pull to do more. But at 72, he realized that calm, steady days were not a sign of emptiness. They were a gift. That's why he no longer felt pressure to live his life according to what others thought he should be doing. Some of his friends remarried and seemed happy, while others stayed busy traveling or chasing new goals. Harold respected their choices, but he didn't feel the need to follow. His path looked different, and that was okay. For him, happiness came from sitting on his porch in the evening, listening to the wind in the trees, and knowing he had no obligations pulling him away from that moment. This perspective freed him from the weight of comparison. He didn't need to explain why he chose not to seek a new partner, nor did he feel guilty about enjoying his independence. His peace was enough reason. And if companionship ever entered his life naturally, he would welcome it, but only if it added to his peace, not disrupted it. For older adults, this truth is important: you don't owe anyone an explanation for how you choose to live. If you want companionship, pursue it. If you value independence, protect it. Both are valid, and neither makes you less complete. What matters most is that the life you are living feels right to you. Choosing peace, even when others don't understand, is not selfish, it's wisdom. Point 10. A question only you can answer. When Harold looked back at his younger self, he smiled at how quickly he once would have answered the question, "Do I still need a woman in my life?" Back then, the answer would have been yes, without hesitation. He needed someone to share the laughter, the work, the struggles, and the joy. But now, in his 70s, he realized the answer was no longer so simple. Life had changed, and so had he. These days, it wasn't about filling the space beside him, but about tending to the space within him. That space, once shaped by the presence of his wife, was now filled with peace, acceptance, and quiet self-respect. He still valued connection, he always would, but he no longer believed it had to come from a romantic partner. Sometimes it came from a grandchild's hug. Sometimes from a Sunday phone call with an old friend. And sometimes, it came from simply sitting on the porch at sunset, watching the sky fade into colors, and realizing the moment was complete just as it was. For older adults listening right now, Harold's reflection holds a reminder worth carrying: no one else can decide what you need in this chapter of your life. Some of you may still long for companionship, while others may find deep peace in independence. Both paths are right, because they are yours. The real question is not what society expects, not what friends or family suggest, but what feels true to you, here and now. That answer may change as life unfolds, and that's okay. What matters most is honoring your own needs, your own pace, and your own peace. At this age, the freedom to choose your path is one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself. Harold's story reminds us of something many people don't say out loud: there's no single right way to live after 70. For some, companionship brings joy and energy. For others, solitude offers peace and freedom. What matters most is not meeting someone else's expectations, but listening to your own heart and deciding what feels right for you. Society often places pressure on older adults. Men are told they should move on quickly after loss. Women are told they must stay strong and never show vulnerability. And everyone is told that life without a partner must be missing something. But the truth, as Harold discovered, is much different. Fulfillment in later life is not measured by whether you have someone by your side, it's measured by whether you feel at peace within yourself. For Harold, that peace came from morning walks by the lake, laughter with his grandchildren, and the quiet strength of knowing he was enough as he was. For you, it may look different. Maybe you thrive on companionship, or maybe you've learned to cherish the independence you've built. Both choices are valid. What's most important is remembering that you don't owe anyone an explanation for how you live. At this stage, life is not about competition or comparison. It's about protecting your peace, enjoying the small moments, and creating a rhythm that fits you. Whether that includes a partner or not, the key is that the decision belongs to you. So, let me ask you as we close, how do you see it? Do you feel complete living on your own, or do you still long for companionship in this season of life? Share your story in the comments below. You never know whose heart your words might touch.